I'm Saikumar, and like Marina just mentioned, so I've been working on this conversational AI at least for the past 7, 8 odd years. But again, predominantly in the Microsoft space, from the era of building the bots using Microsoft Bot Framework, Azure AI services, and stuff like that, right? And so today's agenda will be specifically on Azure AI Studio, the new tool which Azure or Microsoft has released recently. And we'll actually go through these eight odd topics that we have here. And we'll try to do a comparison of how the Azure AI Studio will fare against a code way of building your RAG applications. Generally, the frameworks you would use on your RAG, which are ProScript and written in Python or JavaScript, right? And then at the end of the session, or then near to the end of session, we'll have a quick demo of how we can interact with Azure AI Studio and try to build out a chat experience, right? So with that as an introduction, we'll quickly look through the first topic, a managed RAG process, right? So this is a similar topic we had earlier in our previous speakers corner session. Like Arina was just mentioning, we did this whole architecture implementation live during our speakers corner session, and we had this whole implemented in Python and JavaScript. So I just wanted to give a brief to whoever hasn't seen that or whoever is new to this particular RAG itself. And what I have here is two sets of processes. And the process which is above the dotted line is what you could call as the administration process of your RAG application. And the part which is below the dotted line is more of a user experience that you'd like to have, right? And so just to give the idea about the administration itself. So think of it like you have a whole big documents repository on your side, and you have an administrator who looks after those documents, who keeps replacing those documents, or maybe even add some new documents, right? So whenever he does that, there would be certain process that happens on the background, and these documents are chunked, indexed, stored on a vector database, and that's what would be part of your administration, right? And then when you look at the other aspect of the user itself, so the users are the people who would actually access the bot through interfaces like your chat bot on a website or on your mobile app, or maybe even through your IVR channel where you're calling up a number and asking your questions, right? So those would fall under the aspect which is there under the dotted line, where a user would come in and the question is, processed by a certain compute engine, or you could call it as a server in layman terms, and then it tries to get top 5 or top 10 kind of closely related documents out of those 100 or 1,000 odd which the admin has been maintaining. And then it also uses the LLM in order to summarize or shortlist those documents and provide a final answer. So this is basically a RAG system in Crux. So most of the time you would only look at users where he's directly accessing the bot, but we just again wanted to give an aspect of how the administration also happens in the background, so that you are able to relate it to just a code version of doing it versus what Azure AI Studio can offer you. Okay. So with that being said, we'll now jump into Azure AI Studio itself. And what we'll keep doing, from here on is we'll keep looking at the slides. And then again, I'll try to relate those specific items to what you would actually see on the Azure AI Studio, right? Okay, so about the studio itself. So, everyone here, you can go and access this particular URL from Azure, and you'll be actually greeted with their Azure AI Studio. And you can log in with your Microsoft credentials. And if you have a valid subscription, you can, start experimenting with your AI Studio. Right? So what it is is it's actually a repository of models. If you are looking at that aspect, it is also a playground where you can, start playing with these models, try to evaluate, use your test data, and see which model suits you best. And it also has a way where you can, productionize your endpoints, and those endpoints can again be used in your, any other front-ending application, right? And at the same time, it also provides you certain benchmarking view where you can look at the likes of llama 3, something like phi 3 from Microsoft, the OpenAI models, and you can look at some certain evaluation parameters, so that which will actually help you decide which model will suit your particular use case. And you also have a few options to fine tune those models and again host them, but we'll not touch a lot on that final aspect. But just wanted to mention that these are some features that are available and that you can use on the Azure AI Studio. Uh, Okay, so first thing first, we had an initial issue where we wanted to start using Azure AI Studio, but you know, every time you have a new subscription on Azure, you actually have to make a request so that you also get the Azure AI access on your Azure subscription. So this is the URL you need to go and raise a request to Azure, and it's like a Microsoft form, if you want to call it that way. And once you are there, you have filled in the details, you have submitted, you will actually get your Azure AI access after Microsoft does some rule-based evaluation or some checks, right? It takes around roughly 24 hours or less than that. And once you're ready with this is when it's a good time to go into Azure AI Studio, because that's how you can go access these OpenAI models, right? So again, this is something good to know because many of them would falter on it and you might lose your interest. But keep a note of this, guys. Okay, then the whole Azure AI itself, how it's laid out. I mean, the Azure AI Studio, in fact. So there is something like an overarching term called the AI Hub. It's again superset, if you want to call it. And under that superset, you have something like your projects. Maybe your project can be a bot for your finance team, or maybe a bot for your customer service team, right? So those would actually form your projects. And then you have your data, which again can be accessed by several of your projects, which can be accessed by your HR bot or also your bot that's there for the customer service. Similarly, there are base models which can be used by any of the projects and the compute as well. So this is what comprises the AI hub. And this is how the projects are able to use those common resources inside AI hub, right? So I'll quickly jump back here into the uh, let me just switch to my Azure AI Studio. So this is the one. And if you look at it, uh, when you're on the home page, you will actually see the recent projects. And this is one such project I have created, and we'll use this for our demo. But if you can go click on this, it'll actually also show you what are the various resources that are there under this particular project, or what are the resources that are being used by this particular project, right? And if you go click on the hubs, uh, you'll actually see there is just one hub. And this is that hub which is again having the project which I just showed you earlier. So you can go ahead, click here and go create a new hub. Or if you want to look at a view under the particular AI hub to see how many projects it has. So this this is that particular view where right now we just have one project, and the various connected resources like what we just saw in the previous slide are all here. And if you need to go create a new project, just click here and you'll be taken through that route. We'll come back here again, but I just want to give you that relation of the superset and the other items under that AI hub. Yeah. Okay, going back to our slides here. So what we'll do right now is again start looking at specific features that are there on the Azure AI Studio, and then also compare those features with the script based of doing it. And when we say data connectivity, it could be the data that's there on your vector store today. So if you want to do that connectivity on your Python or on your REST based services, so you would have to go get an SDK for the certain vector database or to use some REST APIs in order to create an access and then start getting or retrieving the data or updating the data from that particular vector database. And if you have to create some RBAC way of limiting the access, again, you have to go build in some custom, way of providing certain accesses to your admin, certain accesses to your user, etc. And compare and contrast the same with what you can get out of the box from Azure AI Studio. So you have your data that's already indexed and available on your Azure AI search service. And at the same time, there are services like your Azure storage services, which where you can actually store your documents on your Azure containers. And those again can be processed, indexed, and then retrieved later on. And coming from the RBAC perspective, so you are there on Azure, so you can use uh, the RBAC that is available either through Entra ID or what was previously called the Active Directory. So through that, you can provide some granular level access to various users, right? So that way you're limiting the access to your admin or the people who just have to view or test that specific implementation. And again, because you're there on Azure, you have quite a seamless integration with other services like you might need a SQL Server interaction, which is there on Azure. You might also need some chat history to be stored on a fast enough database like a NoSQL engine on Cosmos DB. So these are some integrations which are there seamlessly available and something you don't have to spend a lot of time like you would have done on a script-based implementation, right? So that's with the data connectivity aspect. And then let's look at the vector store itself, right? So this is in the aspect of how you would store that document data on the vector store. And today you have several ways of creating your embeddings or creating the chunks of those vectors that you have to store on your database. And at the same time, you also have to think about whether you want to use a SaaS product or a SaaS offering from clients like Vector, Pinecone database, or even Quadrant DB for the fact has some offerings which are there as a cloud service, or whether you want to use your own infrastructure, have it on a VM, and then you know try to build a vector database there, and then try to update, retrieve your data from it. So these are some things you would again have to consider along with definitely the scaling and performance in order to build a whole RAG application itself. Now look at the Azure AI Studio. So you have your Azure search service, which is actually a slightly more mature version of your a vector database. And earlier we had this particular service under your Q&A maker, and you also had it as a search service alone. But now you also have various other ways other than just semantic or keyword. So you also have a way to just do a vector search, or you also are able to do a vector plus a keyword search or a hybrid search, which is, the most recommended one from Azure or from Microsoft. So that is the particular search procedure we'll be using in our demo as well. But just to give you an idea of what are available out of the box, right? And at the same time, uh, because you are indexing your documents on search service, you end up having to pay some money to these services. So your search service is actually available pay as you go as well. And uh, I think you are supposed to pay a fixed amount for the amount of data that you're going to index on these kind of services, and also the ingress that's going to happen, right? Then with respect to the open source models itself, so if you have to implement something like a Llama 3 on a server of your own, so you have to use something like a Hugging Face or Olama and try to import your models and then set up that whole service in the background, and then again try to manage the whole performance of it. Whereas when you look at the Azure AI Studio today, so they're actually providing two ways of hosting on, in fact, not hosting, but consuming these open source models. So one is the pay as you go, where they call it as a model as a service today. And there is also resource based, where you pay a certain amount only for your compute, and you can you know, use any of the open source models, and you pay a certain fixed amount monthly. And pay as you go, as it is called, so you pay as per the certain API calls you make and the number of tokens you'll be consuming during those calls, right? And like we know, because it's all there on a single Azure instance, so you would have minimal latency and your handshaking between various services would be very low. So that way you again have a better hand compared to your plain script based uh, or an implementation where your model is on a different VM and maybe your application server is on a different VM, right? So compare and contrast to that. And also, like I said, there are several models that are there out of the box. uh, I'll try to just quickly show you that same thing. uh, just go back to your Azure AI Studio homepage. You'll be on this particular screen. And on your left-hand side is where you can actually go look at the model catalog. And in a brief moment, it should actually load those tons of models. So it's actually 1673 on today's date. So those are the number of models that are available. And if you have to look at specifically what are the open source models, so you can go ahead and filter this. So if I should try to filter on MIT license-based models, so these are the open source models that are available from Microsoft. You have Phi3, a few from Salesforce, etc. And you also have definitely a lot of models from your Hugging Face. Yep. So it's as simple as selecting them and deploying them, and you'll get your endpoints for usage in any of your bot or application you would want to implement, right? Okay, but back to our deck so that we get to look at few other features. And the interesting aspect of chaining itself. And this is where I want to bring in a relation of your frameworks like LangChain or Llama Index, where you would actually want to run step after step, where you are making an initial call to your LLM, you're getting some data, you're shortlisting some data from the vector database, maybe making a decision whether you should call a SQL database to retrieve some records, or maybe try to summarize an answer, etc. So these are some rule-based chains that you can also build on Azure AI today. But instead of doing it plain code way, so there are some tools called prompt flow tools, where you can actually use your Python script, which you would have done uh, on any other LangChain kind of implementation. And they also provide you a graphical interface where you can build your prompts. You can build or you can make some configurations to make those calls to the LLM, right? And they also have some neat way of managing your variables, so that you can exchange the data between each tasks in your certain chain with this variable management. Yeah. And at the same time, if you want to persist the context while you're running through this implementation, you also have a Cosmos DB integration where you can just enable with a click of the button, and your context is being persisted on this particular database. And that way you can retrieve the context history and enhance your particular prompt while you're making these call to your LLMs, right? And at the same time, you also have a graphical way of navigating through your prompt. We'll look through that briefly, where you can actually look at the various tasks that are being executed in the background. So the one on my right hand side is the prompt flow we were just talking about, where you have your inputs here. And if I click on this particular uh, box, you will see my screen scroll on the left hand side, and that will actually take you through the configuration of input specifically. And again, these particular boxes aren't editable, but they are pretty nifty feature where you can navigate into that specific task that you have, right? So if I have to go ahead and see what is there in the extract search intent, which is actually a Python script, I go click on that and I can actually see that specific script under that particular task. Yeah. So we'll not dwell deep into these specific scripts or tasks that are there in the prompt flow. But again, this is just to show you what a prompt flow looks like and what are the various flexible features that it provides you. Right. Okay, so then let's look at the consumption aspect itself. And this is with respect to how you would want to use your LLM APIs itself, right? Or maybe the implementation of your bot's endpoint, right? You might, like I said, you might have your LLM hosted on a VM, and then you want to use those endpoints on your application, and then you want to also restrict the access either through network based or a user credential based limitation. So that would again require you to put in some custom code and SDKs in order to build it on your Python way of doing it or your JavaScript way of doing it. However, if you want to do it on the Azure AI Studio today, so there is a nifty feature again where you get an out of the box authentication where you are able to configure your Azure Entra ID, and only people who are provided access to that application can actually go view your bot. So that is something which is making your life easy. And at the same time, because you're on Azure, you can also restrict your network based restrictions. You can set certain IPs to only access the resource, or either disable access to that resource, right? And again, logging forms is very important aspect, on any application. On your script based approach, you would again have to put in your own script where you want to log your data at a certain, maybe at simplistic level, log it in a file, or maybe also log it on a database, right? But similarly on Azure AI Studio, so there is again logging and trace evaluation available out of the box, where you can go test and look at the various logs that are being generated by your application. Yeah. Then yeah, pretty much we have looked at some prime aspects of Azure AI Studio. And what we'll do now is we'll quickly jump back to our Azure AI Studio and look at various features and try to implement a simplistic bot. Yeah. Okay, so first thing first, let's get back to the home page and let's navigate to our project folder. And this is the view we are greeted with. And earlier we went through the model catalog where we were able to, select or search our specific LLM model, which we want to deploy and we eventually want to use. Sorry. So then you also have your model benchmarks, like what we were mentioning earlier, where you can actually um, pick certain models from your OpenAI, pick maybe some models from your Hugging Face, and try to do a brief comparison and see which one which one would actually suit your need, right? So here you have literally everything selected, but on your right hand side, you can go select something from, let's say, your Meta, and then also maybe try to compare against your Azure OpenAI. So that actually gives you the evaluation. So on your model accuracy, you have your GPT-4 Turbo, which is much better than your Llama 2 7, right? So this is some, you know, comparison that they provide you out of the box so that you don't have to look everywhere else. And at the same time, few more other parameters like your model coherence. Again, you get to compare your likes of GPT-4, GPT-4 point. I don't think they have updated GPT-4 .0, but yeah, I think these are the latest that are there today. Okay, so that's about your benchmarking checks. And they also have something like a prompt catalog, but I haven't found them to be much use at this particular moment because the prompts are pretty simplistic. I think if you try and test it, you might be able to generate much better prompts. So, something like you are an AI assistant, which helps people find information, right? It's pretty simple. But yeah, hopefully, Microsoft is going to improve that, and maybe we can use these templates in our bot implementation itself. So then you have your playground, uh, where you can start playing by selecting your deployments. You can add your data, you can add your system message, and you can start talking to the bot. But before you do that, you actually have to select your deployment, which actually means you need to have some LLM model defined in your deployments tab as well. So down here on my left-hand side is the deployment section. And when you look at it, you'll actually see what all you have deployed so far. And if you look at it, so I have my GPT-4 enabled, I have my 3.5 Turbo enabled. I also have my embedding model at a 002 enabled so that I can create my embeddings, right? And I also have my Phi 3 open source model as well, just for the purpose of showing you how we can use it. But in our demo, though, we'll be predominantly using GPT-4. Yeah. And right here, we are in the model deployment section. And however, if you switch back to the app deployment section, you will also get to see the apps that are deployed using this Azure AI Studio. Yeah. So we'll come back here when we are able to create a bot and we are able to deploy it. So that's where we actually can start using the app. Okay. And that being said, I'll just jump back to the chat section where we were earlier, because that's where we required the deployment. And this, like I said, is your prompt. And in case you need to add your own data, which is like adding the documents or your administrator adding the documents. So this is how you would actually configure that index or the vector database where you have your documents stored, right? So right now I have these two indexes already available where I can select one of them and start asking questions on that. But in case if you are starting off new and you have to set it up yourself, so go click on add new data source, then you select the data source. So either you can go upload your files on this particular screen itself, or let's say you have an existing index and you want to reutilize that, or an existing Azure AI search service which has an index and you want to use it, you go select this option, right? But in case you haven't created anything at all on your Azure AI search service, you can go ahead, click upload files, and you will be provided an option to upload your files. Yeah. So I have actually done and went through that same steps so that I can vectorize my data, and then eventually I have them all on my search service as well. So let's just go back and look at the index that we already have, right? So on your left-hand side, under the components, is your index. So I had two such indexes created. And if you look at this particular vector index name, it'll actually show you when that particular index was created and also the set of underlying documents, right? So I just have two documents at this current moment. So one is your attention is all you need, the big research paper that's there in the public domain. And then I also have a simple rhyme about Jack and Jill, which I have uploaded. And these are the only two documents I have right now. So just going back to your initial RAG process itself. So the reason I want to do that is I want to show you some similarity so that you guys can get a better idea. So you looked at the documents, and those are those two documents that we have. Then we know that they are persisting on a cloud uh, file repository, just like how we saw there. And at the same time, we also used a compute engine in order to chunk those data and create those embeddings and store into the vector database. So the same thing is what was achieved here, right? And when we actually go ahead and submit that particular request of creating the index and upload those files, what Microsoft Azure does in the background is it goes ahead and triggers a job on your Azure ML, right? So that Azure ML is the one which is doing the job of the Azure or the job of the compute that you're seeing here, which actually goes, creates those chunks, and stores that data on the vector DB. And that is exactly the same which you actually see on your right-hand side, where it is of three steps, where the first step, it is creating the chunking. Then it creates the Azure AI search index, which is your search service, and that's where it does that particular thing. And then it registers that index on the Azure AI Studio so that that's how you end up seeing that particular index on the dropdown. Yeah. So instead of just looking at this in a graphical way, what I'll do is go click on this job details. Yeah. And I'm not trying to do this in real time because this generally takes a few minutes, but I did the same thing after the submission of that particular index creation. The job here would trigger. And once it starts on your Azure ML Studio, you would have the same three steps executed here. Yeah. So if you look at or just hover over this particular step here, you actually are provided the parameters view. And here is where you can actually configure your chunk size. Yeah. So if you're coming from your Python way of doing it, so this might be one of those parameters where you would be configuring on what should be your chunk size, what should be your overlap while you are creating those vectors, right? So that's what it is. And then at the same time, you're also providing some configurations of what kind of embedding models you have to use and what kind of connections are necessary in order to store or persist that vectors at the end of the day, right? And similarly, you have your index being updated, and this is where you'll actually start using the detail about your search service, the configurations for that. And then you also have, okay, I'm just waiting for that parameters to come up. I think there is a lag here. Okay. Then that's the asset name. So the Ivory Cup, etc., that you see here, that's the name which you actually saw in the drop down while we are on the playground. Yeah. So that's with respect to the batch process that is equivalent to the compute that you would have used in the administration step. And just to iterate, that actually happened outside your Azure AI Studio. And on the Azure AI Machine Learning Studio, which is again a totally different product specifically for machine learning. Yeah. Okay. So with that out of the way, let's go back to your Azure AI Studio, and we know, these are the two documents. Now back to our chat interface. So let's now start, using the index itself. I think that it should be the moment of truth now. So let's go and query that index and see what kind of answers we can get. Yeah. So again, quite a simplistic prompt. And now we are certain that it's the same index that's being selected. And now you can go ahead and start asking your questions, right? So a simplistic question again. So what is attention all about, right? So I'm hoping to get an answer from the attention is all you need PDF. Okay, so we have an error here which says the model 3.5 turbo is not supported, and I'll have to go select a GPT-4 model. So let's go back here and go select our GPT-4 as the LLM, and then let's try it again, because right now the playground is not supporting the version 3, and probably they're going to deprecate it soon. But yeah, let's start using the GPT-4 itself. All right, the same question again, copy, and let's paste it, and let's try to run it. So hopefully we should now get an answer from the attention is all you need PDF, right? Okay, there you go. So it's giving you that answer just like how your chat GPT will give you, message after message, word after word, and there is your answer. And at the same time, it's also providing you the references as in from where it's trying to get that answer from. And if you look at the superscript that is available for each of those sentences or phrases, so that's where it's pointing to. So it's actually pointing to various pages, various parts of this particular PDF. Yep. So in real life, if you go click on this PDF, it'll actually navigate you to that particular source. But right now, it actually is going to show you that particular citation in the sense which part of the PDF this answer has been picked up from. Yeah. So maybe in your real life application, maybe the experience could be that a PDF could be opened and you will be navigated to that certain part or the certain page where the bot actually got you that answer. Yeah. Okay. So that's how you can get your answers. Maybe I'll just try to put in another question about the RIAM document as well, the one which we uploaded. So let's ask, how did Jack fall down, right? So everyone knows what happened there. So, but still, let's find out, asking that question. So, now it should now go and get an answer from the second document. And there you go. So it actually did say that it's getting the answer from, the Jack and Jill PDF. And it also provided us the reference. And it was just a single page document. And, that is what it is knowing about that answer for you. So that out of the way, what we can also do here, right from this particular page of the chat playground, is you can go ahead and you can export this configuration as a JSON file so that when you come back to this particular page, you can again import that same JSON file through this particular interface so that you can again look at the same bot, try to play with it, and so that you don't have to do it multiple times. And the reason you have to do that is because this is a playground and not really an app that's being created, right? But still, there is a way where you can version it by saving it manually as a JSON file and again reusing it. Yeah. And then you also have a way where you can look at the code. This is with perspective of using or consuming this particular bot that you have built here, and going ahead and embedding this in your Python code so that you have that same experience coming up. You might not be able to view that UI similar to this, but at least this should be the backend piece of script that you can reuse and customize it as per your need. Yeah. Okay, so that was with respect to the view code. And then you also have the big feature about the prompt flow itself, which is, like I mentioned earlier, similar to what you do on your LangChain. And with this as your base, config, right? Base config, as in you have your LLM configured, you have your search service configured, and you would like to go and utilize that configurations in your, prompt flow, where you can customize it much more. And if you go click on that prompt flow, is where you're suggested a new name, and that's where your indexes, like I was mentioning, and also the LLM would get exported, and you will be able to see that flow diagram which I was showing earlier, and you can go ahead and customize it. So this takes quite a short time because we don't have any compute being required here. So I'll still try to do it, where I'm creating a prompt flow right now out of this configuration. And in a few moments, you should be able to see a second prompt flow with this particular name under my left tab. So I didn't have to navigate to the prompt flow, but once the process started, it automatically navigates us into the prompt flow tab. And this is where we end up, where it's actually the guts of the whole app that we were running in the playground, where it was trying to run these set of steps or tasks, if you want to call it that way, and eventually it was generating an answer after a final call with the LLM. Yep. So again, prompt flow is quite a deep topic. We'll not go much into detail, but what I wanted to bring to your notice is you can select several of these steps that are available and put them in the flow in order to build that customization that you would want. Yeah. So we'll look at it briefly, maybe about these features. Maybe we'll try to create one of these steps, but in the meanwhile, I'll go ahead and start one of the prompt flows so that we can also go try play with it. And if you look at the screen, I have something like start compute session. And again, I want to go back to my original diagram that I had on my deck. And if you relate it, it's this particular compute engine here, which is on the user side. So this compute engine is what is going to accept your user utterances or user queries and do that orchestration of getting answers from the vector, from the LLM, running some custom Python scripts, right? So that's the exact configuration you would do when you say start compute session. So they provide you a way where you can go into advanced settings, look at your various configurations of what kind of infrastructure you need, and then, go select it and then set it up, which will actually be that compute resource where, you'll be running this bot. So we could do that config, but just for the ease of the demo, I'll just go ahead and start this compute session, and we'll let it, kick up. It'll take a couple of minutes, and by then we'll look at the prompt flow which we just created, right? Okay, so it's just checking. You have some unsaved changes. Go ahead to search changes or cancel to continue. Okay, so let's do one thing. So let's stay on the same particular prompt flow, but at the same time, I'll try to explain you uh, various features that are available here. Yeah. So At the topmost is what you always have your inputs and your outputs. And after that is what you can put any of these LLMs, prompt, or your Python script. Yeah. So if I go ahead and click LLM, so you will actually see a new box open up. So sample LLM for test. So this is how you just provide a name to it, click an add, and then it again asks you to configure a connection, right? So this connection could be any of your GPT 3.5, GPT 4, and then you can go ahead and start creating the prompt for it. Yeah. So I had just one OpenAI service, and then I have to select the API for the chat. And then again, the deployment name is where you actually select that specific LLM you want to use. Yeah. So this is how you would select your GPT-4. And at the same time, if you look at it here, there is already a template which is provided to you, as in you have a prompt, you have a user's question, which is actually a variable question, which you can actually use in your bot. And if you click on validate and parse input, it's again a nifty way where the studio is trying to manage your variables so that once I click on it, you will see the input variables appear in this section. And to that variables is what you can go ahead and assign any static data or any data that's there, uh, in the previous steps or maybe the question itself, right? But before we do that, I wanted to show you how this particular step here on the flow diagram is still hanging. So you don't have anything in the upstream, you don't have anything in the downstream. And that will get configured only after you configure your inputs, which will actually mean that, hey, there is a input that's being generated on a XYZ step, and that is actually the upstream for your new sample LLM step that you have just created, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and click validate and parse input, which will actually go understand that question is a input variable, and you'll actually see the configuration come up. Okay, there you go. So this is that variable I was talking about, and this is the question variable. And here, once you click on this text box like that, you are provided with various inputs, from any other step. And once you configure that, you will actually see that line connecting into your step. Okay. So if I go and click inputs query, which is nothing but the query which the user has, put into the chat box, you will see our particular step, it's now having a upstream step as well. So this is our step which we created. And if you see now, it has a upstream connection, right? So this is how you will actually configure your whole prompt flow. And at the same time, if you are expecting an output from this particular step, you again have to go back and configure your output saying, hey, my reply is not coming from this get employees step, but it's coming from that sample LLM, for test step. And once you do that, your again flow lines would change. It's all happening automatically, so don't blame for the beauty of it, but it's still able to show you that connections pretty well. So now you see the downstream which is configured, and that should be your final output that's here, right? So that's how you create a flow in a basic way, but there are a lot of other complex things that you can achieve by conditionally creating flows and trying to evaluate some inputs and then trying other chains of it, right? So what we'll do is we'll go back, change the step back to the configuration it was earlier, and we'll also not use that particular sample which we have because we don't want to cause any errors. So we'll go ahead and delete this particular step which we just added. However, at the same time, I wanted to show you two such steps which I have added. So, if you looked at the earlier playground setup, we never had anything where we were trying to get some employees related question, right? So what I have done here is I wanted to do something very simple where I'm asking a question of uh, how many of my employees have a salary range like 40,000, like how many of them have a salary around 80,000, right? So those are some queries I want to run. And at the same time, I'm hoping to get an answer after evaluating my database, uh, which is probably behind a REST API, or it could be on your SQL database or any of them. But in Crux, what I want to do here right now is I'm running a system prompt, which I have written manually, and I'm also passing my user query, and I'm asking the assistant to just extract that number, which here is something like 40,000, so that I can use that number in my query or in my search query or in my SQL query, right? So that's what I wanted to do. And again, for the configuration, I have put user query as my input, and the value is nothing but the question that we had earlier. And then once I know that I'm able to retrieve that number, which is nothing but the output from this step, is I am actually running a Python prompt here. Yeah. So I'm running this Python script. I'm sorry. So this is where I'm trying to go get some data out of a dummy free REST-DB database that I have created. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to pass some uh, you know parameters like the number we have retrieved. So this is very simplistic in these terms where I'm just passing a single variable and I'm able to retrieve back the count. So right now you have the APIs in plain blind sight, but you can still use Azure Key Vault where you can store that particular keys and retrieve it back before you can start using it. But just for the sake of demo, these APIs are dynamic and they'll be deleted after this session. But however, back to the topic. So this is what I'm trying to do here. So if I'm able to retrieve input one, which is greater than zero, I am running this whole API and trying to get that count. But if I don't have a number that's greater than zero, I would just pass the input two. But the question is, what are input one and input two, right? So input one is the number which we just retrieved from the previous step. And the input two is the generate reply output, you know, which came out of the box, right? The generate reply, which we were seeing in the playground, and that's the same output I have here. So the whole intention is if I have a question which is related to the employee salary count, I'll go in and return that as well. But if I don't have it, I just return the same reply it would have sent without my custom script. Yeah. Okay. With that being said, just let's quickly run the chat itself. So this was the message I was trying to test earlier, but again, we'll go ahead and test it now, as in we'll ask what is attention all about. So what I'm expecting is the same answer that, or in fact, a similar answer as what we were able to see on the playground. And it should also provide you that UI where you can actually see the citations, the data set it was able to access before it gave you that summary of the answer. Yeah. So this generally takes a while because it's running quite a lot of scripts in between, and it's also making some LLM calls where some of the LLMs calls have pretty huge prompts. I'll show you one of them. So this particular generate reply step, it has such a huge prompt. And this is again one way where you're trying to get as less hallucination as possible so that your answers are quite accurate. And that's why, this first call would generally take a few seconds to complete. So once this particular call completes, I'll actually take you through the view trace so that we can look at what are the various inputs and various outputs at each step. And if at all there's an failure that occurs, so you can also go ahead and debug that same thing, right? So let's just give it a moment for that to complete. And once that is done, you will see a status update here where currently it's saying running, but once it's done, you see a complete message showing up. Yeah. And at the same time, every time you make an update to this particular prompt flow, you will actually have to go ahead and save your particular changes so that you don't lose that valuable script that you have custom made and you have put in there. Okay, so it looks good. So I think it's completed now. It took quite a while, around 78 seconds, but now this is the final answer it came up with. Yeah. So quite a similar answer to what we had there. And it's just that the the superscripts are notated a bit differently. So instead of it being a superscript, they have some references to that. And at the same time, I am trying to see what happened to our custom script, whether it did even run, right? So this is that custom script. So you can actually go ahead and look at the inputs that are there. So if you see, the input one was a 0 because we never asked a question about the salary. And we had the input two, which was the expected reply, and the reply which was also earlier generated. And that's why we never had you know, answer related to your salary count or the employee count. So what I'll do is I'll ask a bit more convoluted question where I'll ask what is attention all about, right? And I'll also try to add in an additional query of how many employees have salary less than, maybe I'll put 50,000 this time, right? So I'll let it run, but hopefully it should take less than 78 seconds this time because uh, I think now the server is warm and should be able to get a faster response. But in the meanwhile, I just want to show you the data that's for realistically there. So this is that database I was just talking about, and it's there on the REST DB. So if you guys want to experiment with having just a simple database and you want to put in some data and retrieve from it, so this is quite a good playground for you. So like you see, there are some 100 records and there are salaries that are here. And all that we are trying to do is try to get all of the employee count where the salary is like less than 50,000. Yeah. Okay. With that being said, let's see if our prompt has finished. So it's still in running state. So let's just give it a few more seconds and we should be able to look at the data. And in the meanwhile, I also wanted to show you the deploy feature, which is the last thing that we'll be doing in this session today, where I'll be going back to my chat playground and I'll be deploying my solution so that I'm able to create a UI and a backend so that which can provide you a endpoint URL. And once you access that, there would be a chat interface showing up. You can interact with it and only interact with it if you're authenticated, right? Okay, so we have an answer here. So the requested information is not available in the retrieved data. Please try on the query or topic. But however, we got the second answer here. So that happened because if you go back to the last custom step which we added, so if you look at the input section, there you go. So we have a certain number, and that's why our script got executed of firing an API. And then we are able to, concatenate that final answer about the employee count. Yeah. So again, this is quite a basic thing that I'm showing you guys, but with these complex conditions and calls to whatever resources you want, you can build those different flows altogether. Okay, so that and that. Uh, Now we'll again quickly head back to the chat playground where I wanted to show you a preview feature which is available out of the box today, where you can go ahead and deploy this particular view into a web application, which is again, you call it as web app in terms of Azure set of services. And what I'm trying to do is update an existing web app. But if you're doing it for the first time, you will have to create a new web app. Again, it's a Azure terminology for creating your applications, either using Python, .NET, etc. Again, without considering anything about your VMs, etc. But back to the configuration, and you go ahead, select your subscription, and then again select your specific app to where you want to deploy this particular web chatbot to. And this is that feature where I was talking about, click a button and you will have your Cosmos DB as well configured. But I don't want to do that right now because again, I'll have to go create a Cosmos DB before it gets completed, or creating a Cosmos DB, it's going to take time, right? So we'll do with the setup that's out of the box, we'll go ahead, deploy it. And if you had done a way of creating a new web app, it would have taken quite a lot of time. But this should take just a few seconds. And because it's in preview, the UI is a bit cluttery, but in the background, you see this message coming up saying deploying web app. Deploying the web app takes a few minutes. You can view the status on the deployments tab. And on the left-hand side, under your deployments tab is where you can look at the app deployment. So this app deployment here is the one which you are just trying to deploy, right? So this is that particular app which I was just trying to select from the drop down and push my web app to. Now, we know that there is a successful status, but still let's go ahead and access that app through the chat interface, right? So what we should be certain about is if we want to access that app, uh, let's just hold on until this launch button is blue in color. And that happened because there was momentarily a notification saying it was successfully deployed. So the moment of truth. Now, once we go ahead and click it, you should be able to view that UI where you'll be actually able to see that, the bot kind of interface. So this is that interface, and this is the public URL that is available out of the box again, and you are able to talk to your bot, and you can even go ahead share this particular URL to whomever you want. So same set of questions again. Let's try how it goes. Yeah. Uh, what is attention all about, and how did Jack fall down? So let's try to cryptically ask multiple questions. Let's see how it behaves. Yeah. And hopefully, the answer should be a bit faster compared to what was happening in the prompt flow, because there is now a dedicated service running in the background. Okay, which is good. And uh, okay, there was a slight error. Let's see what went wrong. But before we do that, let's just refresh the page and try the same thing again. Because for a brief moment, I did see the answers were coming up, but they could have been some network glitch altogether. But let's give it a try again. Okay, I'm just trying to refresh the page. In the meanwhile, we'll just try to look at one of the previous experiences that we had. And let me just check if I'm online. Okay, I know I'm connected to the internet. Uh, okay, let's give it one more try from the launch. And if it doesn't work, we'll try to get into the Azure portal and see what's going wrong, right? Okay, it might take a while, but let's go here. So this is the underlying Azure Web App Service, and the same that I have already opened up for you guys. And I want to see what's going wrong. So just let me refresh and see what it shows up. Da-da-da. So you have the status as running, and it's the same endpoint that you saw earlier. And if you'll go look at the app insights, you can actually go ahead and debug what's going wrong. Ah, okay, so we don't have any application insights configured. So it could take a while to debug in such case, but let's see if our bot is up. No. Okay, let's see if we can restart the app and see if it is able to resolve the issue we have. So we have the web app successfully restarted. Let's try to launch the app again. Hopefully it should have those configurations, intact, and we should be able to access the bot. And in a few moments, hopefully we should be able to see that UI again. But let's look at the alerts or logs if they are configured. Okay, we don't have the logs configured. Let's look at the metrics. Uh, okay, I think this will take a while, but let's just see if we can open this up on the incognito and verify if it's not something to do with the authentication itself. Let's have it open up. Okay, but I think it's going to take a while to debug that, but I'm pretty sure you guys have seen that the app did come up and we were able to get the answers. And similar to the UI which you were able to see on the playground, you will be able to again get the answers, the citation, etc. Right? So that and all is what I wanted to show you guys today, and the demo of what is available out of the box and how you can create your RAG applications on the Azure AI Studio and eventually build those bot applications which you can go and embed on your websites or on any of the applications you want.